So we're making progress. We've now got the ability to submit the data that we type into our input fields outside of our form. So let's go ahead and create some handler methods so that we can actually update our activities in the list. Now what we're not going to do at this stage is persist our changes to the API. We're just going to stick with updating things locally. And in the next section we'll add all of the methods we need to do to persist what we're doing into our API. But for now we're just going to keep things simple and just save the changes locally. So let's head back to VS Code, and I'm just going to clean things up in my tabs in VS Code. And what we want to do is go into our app components, our app.tsx, and inside here we're going to add some handler methods to both create an activity and edit an activity. And while I'm here, I've just seen a bunch of things that don't need to be in here, so I'm just going to remove them from the app component. And what I'm going to do is just add a couple of handlers, and the first one will be a const of handle create activity. And this is going to take an activity as a parameter, which is going to be of type iActivity. And what we want to do is simply set our activities. And this is an activities array, so what we can do is use the spread operator to take our existing activities and spread them across into a new array. And then we can simply add a comma and add our new activity onto this array. And then what we can do is add another handler and say const handle edit activity. And again, this is going to take an activity of type iActivity. And in this case, what we want to do is update a specific activity. And what we can do is just use a similar process we did to create an activity. We can spread our activities. And then what we can do is filter out the activity that we're updating. So I'm going to say activities.filter. And then we want to add the expression and say a.id that is not equal to activity.id. So this is now going to contain a new array of all of the activities that do not match the ID of the activity we're passing in. And then we can just add a comma and pass in our newly updated activity in here. So these are our two methods to both create an activity and edit an activity. And what we need to do is pass these down to our activity dashboard and then onto our activity form. So we have to go through the process of adding them as props to our activity dashboard. So I'll just say create activity is equal to handle create activity, and edit activity is equal to handle edit activity. Now it's getting quite busy passing all these properties down to our activity dashboard, which is purely acting as a middleman for all of these different properties that go off to various other components. Now, what we currently have is a very small application, and if this was as big as our application was going to get, then this would be perfectly manageable. But our application will be getting bigger, and we're going to look at alternatives to how we're doing things at the moment. And we are going to be adding a state management system using MobX. And this is going to remove the need for us to pass all of these properties down into our different components. But at this stage, we're just concentrating on React and just using pure React to create a simple CRUD application in our React application. But it won't always be like this. So anyway, let's go to our activity dashboard and pass in these two new functions. So I'll open up the activity dashboard. And in here, what we can do is say create activity. And the signature for this is going to be activity as a parameter of type iActivity. And we'll just return void. And we'll have edit activity. And again, this is going to be an activity of type iActivity. And again, it's just going to return void. And then we need to pass these down as destructured props into our activity dashboard. So we'll say create activity and edit activity, and then we can pass these two down to our activity form. So we'll say create activity equals create activity and edit activity equals edit activity. And once again, we're going to need to do the same thing that we did in our activity form that we've just done in our activity dashboard. So I'm just going to copy these two properties into my clipboard and head on over to the activity form. And in the activity form, we'll just need to pass these into our props, our interface, and then destructure them inside our components. So we'll say create activity and edit activity. And then we can deal with this in our handle submit method. And what we need to do is make a decision about whether or not we're creating or editing an activity. Now the difference between the two is that one's going to have an ID that's not an empty string, and the other one is going to have an empty string as its ID. So if we're creating an activity, then what we can do is just check the length of this particular string, and if it's equal to 0, then we know we're creating a new activity. And if it's not equal to 0, then we know we're editing an activity. So we can use that information inside our handle submit method, and what we can do is add an if statement, and we can say if the activity.id.length is equal to 0, then what we can do is say let new activity is equal to, and then we can spread the activity that we have in our state, and then we can specify the ID, and this is going to be a GUID, and we'll deal with this very shortly. And then what we can do is say create activity and pass in our new activity as the parameter. And then we can add an else statement, and we can say edit activity and pass in the activity. So we need to deal with this GUID, and what we can do is add a package into our client app called UUID, which is going to allow us to create a universally unique identifier for our activity. So let's open up our terminal window, and I'll just open up a new terminal session and cd into the client app, and I'm just going to npm install UUID. This is a very, very popular package for creating GUIDs on the client side. And once this is installed, let's go up to our imports at the top. And what I want to do is import, and in this case I'm going to say v4 as UUID from UUID. And there's different versions of the way we can create these unique identities inside this particular package, and we're going to use the version 4 method of doing so. Now we're getting a warning here, or an error, saying that it could not find a declaration file for module UUID, and it implicitly has an any type. Now if we do ever come across things like this when we're installing a package that we're using inside a TypeScript project, then what we can do is simply follow the guidance in the error, and it says here try npm install at types/UUID. And this is what we're going to do. We're simply going to follow the instructions here. I'm going to copy this into my clipboard, and if there are type definition files available for this particular package, then we'll go ahead and install them. And all of the type declaration files for all of the different packages are typically stored in a type definition repository, and it's the one called @types. So let's see if we can go ahead and get this installed whilst we're here, and I'll just do npm install @types/UUID, and I know this exists because I've already tested this before, and this goes ahead and installs the types for this package that we're using. And what we'll see is that now the warning has gone away. And what we can do for our ID that we're creating is simply say the ID is UUID, and this will create a GUID for us for our new activity. So let's go ahead and see if we can actually create an activity now. And when we do create it, we should see it populate inside this list. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new activity called test, just with some random data in. I'm not going to worry too much about what things are at this stage because we're not persisting the data anyway. And if I click on submit, well, first of all, we leave our form open. That's something we should deal with. But if we take a look at our activity list, we should see our newly created activity inside here. And we do. And sure, there's things that should be improved. The date is in a different format to everything else. And that's something we still need to deal with as well. But we have seen that we can now create an activity. And if we take a look at one of our existing activities, and here we see another problem, we can't actually click on to view an activity whilst our edit form is open. So I'm just going to cancel out of this and click on past activity 1 and click on edit and just update the title of this particular activity and click submit. Now our list has rearranged itself and our past activity has disappeared from the top of the list, but what we should find is down the bottom that our past activity has been updated to past activity 11. So we're kind of getting there. And what we need to do is make some adjustments to our edit and create handlers so that we turn off the edit mode, we select the updated activity so that we can display the updated activity in our details when we submit the form. So let's make a few more changes inside our app.tsx file. And let's take a look at our handle create activity method. And after we've added our new activity, let's say set selected activity, and we'll set this to our newly created activity. So that after we've created it, we're displaying the newly created activity in the details view of our component. And we'll also set the edit mode to false. And in our handle edit activity, what we'll do is we'll say set selected activity to the updated activity, and we'll also set the edit mode in this case to false. And let's go and take a look and see if this has worked. So if I click on view past activity 1 and click on edit, and I'll just make some changes again and click submit, then we see our updated activity in our details component and also at the bottom of our list. And the reason it gets added to the bottom is that when we edit an activity, we're creating a new array from our existing activities except for the one we're updating, and then we're adding it onto the end of this array. And later on we'll be ordering this list of activities by date so that it doesn't rearrange the list of activities when we do this. But let's just go ahead and create a new activity, and once again I'll just put in some rubbish data, or we'll give it an actual category so that we see the image when we add this new activity, and I'll click submit and we can see our new activity is created. Now we've got a bit of cleanup to do here because not everything is working perfectly. If we click on other activities, we can still view them. We can still edit the activity, but we're not seeing the dates for this particular activity inside here. When we cancel and we go back, that's fine. And we can create an activity from here and click cancel. But there is an issue when it comes to creating an activity and then clicking on view. That doesn't work. And if I click on cancel, I go back and view and edit. And I also cannot create an activity when I've already opened another one up for editing. So there's a few problems that we need to deal with to just clean things up before we move on to the next part, which is to add the delete functionality. But let's fix the small problems that we have at the moment so we have a clean working application.